Go ahead and call this special board meeting to order. We'll start. The first two items will require actions. 2.1 is facility discussion. Discussion and action concerning approval of facility mechanical system service contract.
I'd like to make a motion that the board I'd like to make a motion that the board reject all proposals received for RFP number 48-20, facility and mechanical system services, HVAC maintenance, and authorize staff to reissue the RFP.
Second.
We have a motion by Dr. Chasson and a second by Mr. Centani. We're going to ask if there is any public comment on this agenda item. Any board member comment or questions on this item? No comments or questions. Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Eight for, none against.
Motion carries. We'll move on to the next item, which is 2.2. Discussion and or action concerning the Director of Risk Management job description. Mrs. Centani.
Mr. President, I move that the board approves the updated Director of Risk Management job description as attached in the public content section of this agenda item.
A second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Centani and a second by Ms. Morrison. Is there any public comment on this agenda item? Any board member questions or comments?
I do.
Dr. Aguilar?
So maybe Suzanne Thibodeau, I don't know who authored this job description. Justin? Okay, so a couple questions. As the qualifications are written currently, it says bachelor's degree, supervisory or administrative experience, 5 years experience in the insurance industry. So it sounds like we're looking for anyone with a bachelor's degree would be eligible for this position, because it says bachelor's degree and then it says administrative experience. So are we looking for anyone with a bachelor's degree would be eligible at that point for consideration to apply for this position? I have a series of questions. Okay. And what I'm interested in is the administrative experience. It doesn't say how many years of administrative experience. It doesn't say what constitutes administrative experience. The idea of a bachelored individual having administrative experience would likely not be anyone in the school system with a bachelor's degree that would have administrative experience. And if we're looking for someone outside of the public school system, what would constitute administrative experience would be the question I would like to have answered. I Googled just a little bit of information as best I could this afternoon, and it looks like if we're looking for a bachelor's degree, we would need to identify related fields that we think are important for this position. And in the Google search, it said, obviously, we'd be looking for someone with finance or accounting, and we would be looking for someone with a 4-year degree, preferably in economics or business administration, but not just someone with a bachelor's degree. The qualifications call for someone with experience in insurance, but in this Google search for risk management certification, it looks like we should be looking for someone with credentials or experience in the insurance industry, which we have in the job description. Employee benefits would also be a key part of this position, and then financial management. So if we could add those 3 components, I'd feel certainly more comfortable with this. And lastly, in the Google search, I have yet to find a specific list of training hours or courses that would lead to risk management certification. And so I think before we adopt this job description, we would need HR to maybe do some research and identify what would be the preferred way to obtain and have in your possession something called risk management certification, because it looks like some organizations do in fact award risk management certification by attending seminars. And if we're going to give someone 18 months to get this certification, I think we need somewhere in this, we need to identify what is the certification for risk management that we're looking for those people to have, if not in their possession, but certainly within 18 months.
Mrs. Centani?
Thank you, Dr. Aguilar. Those are very good suggestions. I'd say that really, I didn't author this as much as I lightly edited the existing one, as you can see from the agenda where it's in yellow. I corrected a couple of spelling errors, for example. But the thrust of it is in the qualifications. And what I had, the goal here is by putting bachelor's degrees, I didn't want to exclude anyone who may otherwise be qualified to do a fine job. Of course, this does not exclude people with master's degrees. It's at least a bachelor's degree. So if someone in the school system who has administrative or supervisory experience within the school system would obviously have a master's degree, since you have to have that to be a principal, that certainly meets the criteria. What I was shooting for was someone in the insurance industry will typically, maybe they'll have an MBA, but a lot of times they don't have the advanced degrees. And so I didn't want to exclude anyone with the relevant experience in the insurance industry from applying. So that was one. I agree about the certification. We can certainly take it out if you like. It was the one thing that I was really unable to nail down, but we can take it out, and I don't know what you'd like to do there.
I would prefer not to take it out and have this adopted without some language requiring some kind of training, i.e. certification.
Well, I would say that, the attending seminars, or that is typically how industry certifications work. If you go and do 18 hours of continuing education within your field, you will typically get an industry certification such as Certified Risk Manager or something like that. I'll also point out that they offer, colleges now offer 4-year bachelor's degrees in risk management.
They do, that's correct.
And so I don't know if I would be comfortable listing a very specific certification, because I know there are, as you found, there are multiple certifications available in this field. So, but I'm open to any suggestions and any modifications that the board wants to make. The idea being that I want to cast a wide net. I want to attract people, applicants with relevant experience in the field. Insurance industry is very complex, as we all know. And I think it would behoove us and benefit the school system greatly if we had a professional risk manager, especially risk management experience preferred is in there as well. So if anyone would like to make changes to it, I'm certainly open to suggestions. This was really just a starting point for us to work off of.
Ms. LeBeau?
Yeah, I think where I'm confused is the use of the semicolon. I feel like it's in some places I would like to see it maybe an and versus a or if we could find a way to say you could have this or this equivalent, kind of how we break it down on maybe the state website when they advertise for state jobs. I just feel like somebody could read this description and get a little confused on what the requirement is. And then that was going to be another thing that I think in the job description, a requirement that, risk management, attendance at risk management, seminars or risk management, making that attendance at those, whether it's a seminar or CLE or what, we call them continuing education hours as a part of the job description is maintaining some type of training up to date. But are we going to, if they do go for a risk management certification within 18 months, are we paying for that certification, or we're going to require, I think that could be clarified as well. So those are just, the use of semicolons is throwing me off because I can't tell whether it's this or this. And then 5 years in the insurance industry could be it could be sales, it could be a lot of different things. I just feel like if we could tighten it up like Dr. Aguilar pointed it out, I think we would get that net that you're looking, or we'd get the right fish in the net that we're looking to catch.
Any more questions? Mrs. Centani?
I think the semicolon does mean and in this case.
But in some of them it looks like it's
Well, there's an or.
risk,
There's an or inside when I intended there to be different ways to satisfy that requirement, but each of those should be an indication that you need to have this experience, except when it says preferred, of course. Perhaps we could take the certification out of the qualifications and put it in the essential duties and responsibilities that the person attains a certain number of continuing education hours per year on the topic of risk management. That would satisfy not tying ourselves to any particular certification, but also ensure that they are keeping abreast in the latest developments in the industry. Yes.
correct. Yeah, I think that would help us to make sure that we don't take out, or exclude anyone that would be a great candidate and that could then attend those certifications or hours that we need for the right experience on the right topics.
And as far as experience in the insurance industry, does anyone have any preferred experience?
I would say 5 years experience in risk management.
It's going to be difficult.
You think?
It will be difficult to say specifically
the
risk
three
management.
bullets I found this afternoon: insurance industry, experience, employee benefits, and financial management. If we could weave that into these are some of the qualifications we're looking for. Because what we're doing now is we're essentially saying we're looking for someone with a bachelor's degree, and we're probably going to find someone in the insurance industry, and we're going to allow them 18 months to get certification or continued learning units in risk management. So we're really making this thing wide open. And we could choose poorly. This is an important position for the district. There are millions, perhaps, of dollars at risk by selecting the wrong person to manage the risk management department for the Lafayette Parish school system. So we don't want to have to do this over and over again, keep picking a new risk manager. We want to pick the right person with the right credentials that can continue to keep the Lafayette Parish school system out of financial jeopardy.
Mr. President, I think I'll withdraw my motion and resubmit this for the March meeting with this feedback taken into account, if that's all right.
Great. Ms. Morrison, you were the second. Are you okay with this? We will go ahead and defer this to the March meeting.
Okay, next item is 2.3, review of budget recap and timeline. Mr. Guidry and Mr. Richard.
Okay, with regards to the budget recap and timeline, this evening we'll be reviewing all of the non-general fund and non-group insurance funds. So basically, all budgets, with the exception of the budgets for group insurance and general fund, is what we'll be reviewing this evening. We'll come back on the 31st and present the group insurance and general funds proposed budgets. We'll follow up on the 8th after the regular scheduled board meeting with the continuation of our discussion of those two proposed budgets. And then subsequent to that, on April 16th, we'll come back with all of the budgets for one final review by the board, so that in preparation for a presentation of the budgets for public inspection on within the time period of April 23rd to May 6th, and then we come back for a public hearing on May 6th, followed by a special board meeting at 4:30, where we would hopefully finalize and adopt the budget. So that's basically where we are with regards to the budget timeline. Any questions?
Any questions on the board? Not hearing any, we'll go on to the next item. Next item is 2.4, proposed budget for 2020-2021 Special Review Fund. Mr. Guidry.
Okay, so the special revenue funds are basically funds in which we account for legally restricted expenditures that have to be expended for specific purposes. So basically, most of our grant funds are accounted within this fund, as well as our school activity fund. That is a new addition. Previously, school activity funds were considered to be a fiduciary fund, and that has been changed going forward. So we'll now see the school activity funds recorded and budgeted in the special revenue funds. So with regards to that, two other special revenue funds that are not included in this budget, we have separate budgets for those, or the 2002 sales tax and the school food services fund. Those are considered special revenue funds, but we budget them separately for operational purposes. So what we're looking at are federal direct grants, where the funds come directly from the federal government or federal agencies, federal through state grants, where the state acts as an intermediary or a pass-through of the federal funds. And then, of course, we have state grants where they come directly from the state, and then other grants outside of those classifications. So if you look at the revenue section, totals about $41.7 million in revenues, and then the expenditures are shown by the classifications of revenues, federal direct grants, federal through state grants, so on and so forth. And of course, the total expenditures agree with the total budgeted revenues. These proposed budgeted amounts are either based on current year allocations, because we have not yet received an award letter or notification of what the award will be next year. So we base it on the current year, which is the best information that we have available at this point in time. And then later, as the awards are received or the allocations are received, we'll come back with budget revisions to adjust to those awards or allocated amounts. Will say that in comparing the proposed budgets to the current year budget, fiscal year 20, no significant changes in terms of loss of significant grant revenues. So that's encouraging. That's a positive note as we move forward. So with that said, I'll ask if there are any questions. Nothing out of the ordinary, and it would appear upon first glance and what we know now that none of the grant awards, we're not expecting them to be reduced significantly.
Any questions from the board? Ms. LeBou?
I just have one. Can you, the Success by Five Alliance, the tax credit and the child center, I'm assuming that's the same as On Track by Five? Okay. And then what is the second allocation, the child center? It's about 13,000 versus the tax credit, which is about 201,000. I'm just curious why the two are broken down separately.
As far as the child center goes, I don't know if Christine's.
And I mean, you can email me later. It's fine. I just was curious.
Well, we.
It has to do with an award of a reimbursement of some match funds to textbooks. If the Child Care Center agreed to buy some textbooks through the CCR&R, they gave some a portion of it through another grant.
Okay, so it's a reimbursement for textbooks or a
Yeah,
separate
I know
grant?
one of the fundings had to do with that, and it was only for child care centers were the only ones allowed to participate in that Tier 1 curriculum purchase.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You got something, Dr. Saxton?
The school activity fund, what is it exactly used for?
Well, that's the sum total of all of the schools' funding that they collect at the school site. You know, fundraising, activities, things of that nature, student fees, activity fees. So this is basically the financial reporting for the schools, the funds that are accounted for at the school level.
Okay. Could I get an email as to the breakdown?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Okay,
Got
we'll
it.
move on to item 2.5, proposed budget for 2020-2021 capital projects, capital improvement fund. Mr. Guidry?
Okay, so with regards to capital project funds, and we have multiple capital project funds, we're basically, these funds are used to account for asset acquisitions, constructions, renovations, purchase of equipment, items over that have a unit cost of $25,000 or more. So within the capital project funds, the first one that we're presenting is the capital improvement fund. This particular fund, if you look at the revenues real quick, the majority of the funds are a distribution or an allocation from our sales tax fund of $2.5 million. We have $2.5 million that's allocated from our sales tax collections directly from the sales tax fund to fund capital projects. In addition to that, we have interest income that is earned on funds that remain in the bank account until we pay our bills, so to speak. And then we have $175,000 that's a transfer from debt service, and what that represents is debt service fund, and we'll go over that when we get to that fund. We're required to keep the total of all of our debt service requirements for a year, basically. The highest debt service requirement that we have for the life of all of our debt, we have to have that set aside. There are two other provisions or two other calculations that we can look at. That's one of them. You know, and this is the interest that we're earning on that money that we've set aside that's required to cover 1 year's debt service. That's what's basically showing up there. So that's our revenue stream. It's pretty consistent from year to year, and so I would like to call your attention. That's the revenues. The very first line item is the beginning balance. In other words, our fund balance for capital carries over. Anything we don't expend in 1 year carries over to the following year. And we're carrying over $23.3 million. The reason for such a significant carry forward is when you look at some of the reserves that we have set up. We have on page 2, if you can go to the reserves real quick, scroll down. Right there. We have a reserve for technology, one-to-one replacements, $1.2 million. We have committed for next year projects. This would be fiscal year 22. We try to set monies aside 1 year ahead so that we know that we have funds available for that year. Classroom setup furniture and a reserve or a commitment for HVAC equipment replacement projects, $10.6 million. So that's pretty much the lion's share of what's coming forward. So the reserve for HVAC equipment, you know, I really applauded the board's decision when they first approved setting up this reserve, because with regards to the RFP that we'll be sending out for our third-party contracted services to maintain our HVAC equipment, no matter which company ends up getting awarded that contract, they're going to do an inventory of every piece of HVAC equipment we have in the school district. And so the contract reads such that if any of that equipment has to be replaced, first of all, they maintain it. If it goes down and can be fixed, they have to replace it on their dollar. So when the firm comes in, they do an inventory and they pull out any equipment that they do not feel comfortable including in the contract. This is boilers, band call units, whatever the case may be, that if, you know, maybe anywhere from 25 to 40 years old. They know that because of age, there's a really good chance it's going to have to be replaced no matter how well they maintain it. So this reserve helps us cover that equipment if and when they should fail. So it's a very good move by our prior board, and explains why we have the reserve is based on what our contractor has pulled out of the contract. We have it covered. So that is a good thing. So going forward, we covered the beginning balance, we've covered revenues. Beyond that is the listing of the projects that have been requested either through our maintenance department or by each of our schools. We have a capital request time period where each school has an opportunity to submit its request to facilities, the facilities department, and then we accumulate it, we summarize it, and we meet with the superintendent and a few others, a few other administrators, and we decide which ones to include in this report. For the most part, if the funding's there, that we've done this year, most of the projects were funded. We had very few that were not funded. Those that were not funded, most of them were of the nature of a new gym or a new replacement of a fifth grade wing. Well, those are more bond-related projects. The capital funds are not meant to fund such large projects, because if we do, there's not going to be much left to replace roofs and do HVAC replacements and so on and so forth. So that's the process that we use both for the capital improvement fund and the self-funded construction, which will be the next one that we talk about. The first line item under current expenditures is relocation of portable buildings. As we know, we have several wings that are under construction, and I would suspect that as early as beginning part of this summer, we'll be removing.
Excuse me, Mr. Guidry, what page are you on right now?
I am on the first page of the budget. Can you all see it from? No, there's off. So if it's the first line under expenditures, 2.5, agenda item 2.5. Have you located it, Ms. Morrison? Okay. That is due to the significant number of portable buildings that will be moving off of the campuses once the wings are constructed. I just wanted to provide that explanation. Besides that,
Mrs. Centani?
While we're talking about portable buildings, do we have a plan for the one leased portable building? That was in last year's budget as well. We went from 16 to 1. We're almost there.
Yeah.
I'd really like to get that to 0 if we can, especially if we're going to be moving some buildings off of other campuses.
I'll
So-
defer to Mr. Bordelon on that. The location of that leased building, depending on which campus is on, will determine how quickly we're able to get to return it back to its owner.
What's that? This year?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
The remaining projects are those that were, other than the reserves that we discussed earlier. On the first page are those that were requested by the schools. I would ask if there are any questions concerning these projects.
Any questions from the board?
Do you have a list of the projects that didn't make it into your budget? Am I seeing that? Are those reported on here at all? Like these are things that have been requested, but you felt that we couldn't put it into the budget this year?
We do not have a list attached to the agenda item, but we can provide one.
I'm just curious, just to watch, what
Sure.
made it on this year, but hopefully might make it on next year.
Certainly, we can provide you with that.
Mr. Guidry, you're showing under school improvements, Acadiana High, 40 by 40 storage shed for new track. Is that just for Acadiana High, or will Karen Crow and Como with new tracks also get a storage shed?
This was the only request from the schools for a storage shed, so again, I would defer to Mr. Bordelon. I don't know if that means that the other two schools already have the storage sheds, or if we need to consider adding them. Mr. Bordelon? We have a mic here if you want to come up to the front.
And I guess while you're thinking about this, Mr. Bordelon, Lafayette High and Northside High, do they already have sheds for their track storage?
Lafayette High does have a shed, or actually two sheds. One's in better shape than the other. I cannot tell you whether they're empty or full. I do not know that. Como High has a couple of those what we call Connex boxes, storage containers. Again, I don't know if they're empty or full, so I'm not sure what their plan is for storing their new track equipment that we hope to get for them.
So at the last board meeting, there was a series of track equipment purchases that were authorized by the board. So it looked like every one of the new schools getting new tracks were getting similar equipment. So what would strike me is they probably all need adequate storage for that new equipment.
Mr. Jeffers might be able to answer that question better than I can. Is Mr. Jeffers here? Here, Mr. Jeffers is here.
I mean, we can look into it and report back once Mr. Jeffers comments, if it's necessary.
It's the track equipment is about $450,000 per school. So The cost of track equipment can run over to $40,000 or $50,000 per school. So my suggestion would be that we have a place to house that equipment so that we're not asking for funding to purchase new equipment in a couple of years because it's dry rotted or damaged due to weather.
Mrs. Santani?
Before we ask for funding for places to store the equipment, can we confirm that we need a place to store the equipment? Certainly the principals would have asked if they need something, right? Or are we just speculating?
I would not want to assume that they would have asked.
Yeah, but the athletic directors at the schools, they're not a shy bunch.
We can poll them.
Okay.
Ms. LeBeau?
And there are, just so I understand, no portable buildings at Acadiana that we're planning on moving that could be used to store track equipment, correct?
I mean, I think we can make an assessment and then, include it when we come back, either as an adjustment or an explanation as to why that they have existing facilities. We've made a note of it, and we'll do our homework and report back.
Thank you.
Dr. Shasta?
Yeah. Nick, if you can reference Northside High's track, on the away side, that's where we store all our stuff, but it's a weird old building. It reminds me of buildings that I went to class in at Vermilion Elementary. It's a tin shed, but it's like a house. It's a big house. Are you familiar? Does that ring a bell for you? Could I compare that to a portable building, technically speaking, or not? Yeah, Northside stores theirs in like a weird metal house looking. It's hard to describe. So it looks like a metal house, and
We affectionately call those the gray ghosts
Gray
because they
ghosts.
just never go away.
okay, yeah, I'm just used to it. Okay, so a portable building is a possibility going forward because you don't even know. I mean, I know it's there, but you're just running the track. Okay, I have a actual question after that.
Okay.
The three new tracks are Acadiana High, Canberra, and Como. Okay, gotcha. And okay, I wanted clarification on that second question. Okay, forgot my second question. Let me go to the third. The carry forward project expenditures for the air handler units, fan coil units, is that something that the preventative maintenance contract should have taken care of, or no? Judy's Middle, Lafayette High, Milton Elementary, replacing 24 fan coil units. Because just coming back from the LSBA convention, talking with other HVAC people, they were like, preventative maintenance, you spend a whole lot of the money initially that you get to get everything up to warranty specifications, and then they're responsible for it. That's what a preventative maintenance. So I was just curious if this is part of what the HVAC contract should have been taken care of for preventative maintenance. Not your fault, just if someone's telling you, hey, we need fan coil units, but I thought that's what the preventative maintenance was.
So that reserve that we talked about a little bit earlier, that we have set up, what happens is, as equipment that is included on what we call the limited liability equipment list. That's the list that the third-party contractor said, hey, we'll maintain these, but we're not going to replace them because of their age when they go down. What happens is, when that equipment has to be replaced, we take it out of the reserve and fund it here, and that way it's not using any of the current funding for it. It's actually using the reserve So these, to answer your question, these would be limited liability or excluded from the contract.
Okay,
From a replacement standpoint, not from a maintenance standpoint.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Mason?
I think I'm just trying to understand how you, okay, so you're saying that the principals put in these requests and then you filter them out and decide which ones are more, most important. Is it random, or do you have a system, like, do you have an amount that you feel, is it equitable? Is every school getting similar amounts, or is it the schools where the principals ask the most get the most, or I'm curious, is there a method?
With regards to the approach, we look to the facility department to identify the higher priority items, and then some of them, when you see the list, are pretty much evident from the start that they don't make the high priority listing. Might be a good fundraising project or something like that. So it's basically professional judgment, and then we defer a lot of that to the facilities department, since they're the ones that are maintaining the equipment and the buildings on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you.
Dr. Sashaw?
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Jeffers, the money that is needed to try and help Northside softball field that is in disarray, would this be where you'd want us to try and find it, or are you looking somewhere else?
If I'm not mistaken, the capital improvements are $25,000 or more. Certainly a complete overhaul and revamp would probably fall within that category.
Okay. You think we can get it done for less than that?
Certainly.
Certainly. Okay. Awesome. And Barranco Elementary basketball court and swings, would that need to go in this? Do I need to carve out some money for that as well? Because Barranco Elementary only has 6 swings, and the poor kids are waiting in line.
No, we actually have the basketball court in the self-funded construction.
Self-funded, okay.
When we go over that, we don't have anything for the swings. I didn't see any requests for that.
Can I make a minor request, like as soon as we can begin to put some swings at Barranco? There's 7, but the 7th one is for a special needs kid, and there's 6. The kids are just waiting in line, and it's just kind of disheartening.
We'll make it.
Yeah, please. Like if we can find it, if we can start that like immediately, if possible. There's just not enough swings at Barranco. J.W. Falk has 32. I live there. I count them, and then to pass by Barranco, it makes me feel bad. Yeah, as soon as possible, please. If they could start yesterday, I'd appreciate it.
Ms. LeBeau?
Kyle, I know when we walked through Como, there were several issues with flooding and some damage to the girls' gym, and there were some areas where the grade needed to be improved so that the flooding wouldn't come into the building, which it does every time it rains. Are any of those, I don't see any of those projects. I looked at the construction fund and I saw some Como, but I wasn't sure if that, I wasn't able to determine that was going to
We have
solve some of those issues.
We have some of our maintenance guys working on those items now.
Okay, so they're currently being addressed and not having to be discussed as a budget item. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any additional questions by the board? Dr. Sashaw?
Somebody help me with this. Barranco's, the thing that rocked, the columns. Have we had a chance to get those addressed yet?
The front?
Yeah, in the front.
Railing? Yes.
Yeah, the where you first walk up into the steps.
Yeah,
okay,
we've
thank
addressed
you.
that.
All right.
Okay, if we don't have any additional questions, we'll move on to item 2.6, proposed budget for 2020-2021 self-funded construction fund. Mr. Guidry?
Okay, very similar to the capital improvement fund, the self-funded construction fund. If you turn to the first page, you'll notice that the revenue streams are pretty much the same. We have the biggest source coming from sales tax, of course, 2.5 million. That's a standard amount that we try to, at a minimum, we try to fund each year. We have a transfer in from general fund. That's from sales tax dedication for asbestos removal, interest income, and we have one line item that's different than the capital improvements fund, and that is a transfer in from the general fund, $1,737,000. What that represents is a couple of board's actions over the past couple of years. Initially, the board approved transferring $500,000 on a recurring basis to self-funded construction. Right now, once it's transferred in, we move it to pay-as-you-go project line item for Lafayette High, Karen Crowe Heights, and Prairie. And I think the idea is, and if I'm not correct, please, Mr. Centeni, can chime in, but is once we feel comfortable that that's recurring, which, you know, we're heading into our third year of being able to transfer those funds in a similar manner, then we could look at utilizing those funds for debt service. So instead of setting it aside, pay as you go, and which is sort of like a savings account until we build up enough money to do a project, we could actually sell bonds and get to that project much quicker. I will say this, as I mentioned, $500,000 was, I think it was 2 years ago, that was about $1,083,000. During the current year, we started at $1,000,000, and by the time we balanced the budget, it got reduced to a little over $600,000, which is about a $250,000. And then there was also in August, after the budget was adopted, there was a board motion to board action that was approved to transfer what we called excess MFP funds. And what I mean by excess is it was over and above what was needed to balance the budget after allowing for some textbook purchases that initially we thought were going to be funded by a grant, and then we found out that the amount of the grant funding wasn't adequate to cover all the purchase. So it netted to $1,131,000, and the board approved it as a recurring transfer. For proposed budget purposes, I'm mentioning it, so if y'all feel differently about it, you know, now would be a time to share that with us. I did not transfer that third amount, the $1,131,000. Basically, I'm planning on leaving it in the general fund, and the reason for that is we've met with the charter school operators in the Youngsville area, and they shared with us the fact that they were going to be expanding to the tune of about 450 students the start of this coming school year, and then that expansion was K-8, and I think a section in 9th grade, and then that was sort of going to be the springboard for opening a high school in a subsequent year where they would roll in the grade levels. So that impact, just using some standard numbers that we use based on experience, would be about $3.2 million to the bottom line. In addition to that, we have textbook adoptions at middle and high school, and we're hoping to also include along with that step increase for our employees. So it's going to be a challenge. It's not to say that we're going to try any less harder, because we have the $1,000,001, but we're going in to the general fund budget process, assuming that we're getting no additional MFP money. So if we can balance it without the MFP money, I can't guarantee there's going to be an increase in the MFP revenues, but it would allow us to take a look at it. If the MFP revenues comes in more than it this year, then that would open itself for the board considering to go ahead and start making that transfer again. So I just wanted to make mention of that because I really have some concerns about balancing the general fund budget, just looking at the big picture. We hadn't made a decision on group health yet in terms of what the premiums need to do there. Board share is 2/3 of that. I'm not saying there's going to be an increase, but we had not made that final recommendation or final determination yet to be able to present to the board. So I wanted to make mention of that. Any questions on that or the revenue section before I proceed?
Any questions by the board? Seeing none, you may proceed.
Let's take a quick look at the carry forward balance, $53 million. Very similar situation, not in amount, but in what we're doing. We have some reserves or commitments set up. They're on page 3. I'll ask Ms. Richard to. They consist of commitment for roofing projects. Think of commitments as reserves, basically. 5.4 million. We have a reserve for fiscal year 22 projects of 7.5 million. We have the remaining reserve for school site renovations and construction of 2.78 million. That's what's remaining from the fund balance, excess fund balance, when we went from 3 months to 2.5 months, and when we transferred that, and we also transferred the unassigned fund balance. And after reallocating or allocating the funds from the reserve to various wing additions that are currently in progress, we still have 2.78 million left. So that's basically school district level. And then we have another commitment for renovations and replacements for 3 specific campuses: Prairie, Karen Crowe Heights, and Lafayette High. That amount is $18,737,866. We have some contingency on these renovations of $306,000, and we have a transfer to the general fund of $1,916,000, which is detailed on Schedule 1. These are basically project requests from the schools and from our central office administrators that do not meet the $25,000 per unit requirement or threshold to be considered a capital project. So what we do is those that we recommend for funding, we sum total it and we transfer from capital to general fund the funds necessary to complete those projects. If we can go to Schedule 1 just for a minute, you will see that that's where we have all of the track equipment for each of the 3 tracks. We have some mowers, Kubota gas mowers, 10. But when I took a look at the mowers that we have located at each of the schools, of the 64 that showed up on the fixed asset listing, we had 10 that were 15 years all the way to 21 years old. So it's not to say that we necessarily going to replace those 10. We're going to replace those that are in the worst condition, but we have some old equipment out there, and we're just trying to make an effort to start cycling it so that we're not spending our repair people time and having them repairing mowers that we should be replacing. That's what that's about. And then we also have a flail mower tractor. The idea there with the additional property that we've purchased for Prairie and Karen Crowe Heights, and in an effort to reduce overtime in general fund, we feel that this particular setup would allow us to not only take care of the additional acreage that our grounds and maintenance crews are responsible for cutting, but by the same token, reducing overtime. So when we look at the general fund budget, feel free to make a note, take a look at grounds maintenance overtime to see if there's a reduction in that budget. Nonetheless, these are the projects that we will take care of in the general fund, but we'll use a capital fund transfer to cover, because to fund these projects with our general fund budget would basically eliminate our maintenance budget that we need for the day-to-day stuff. That's the line of thinking there. I'm sorry, say again. So what happens is the unit price of these projects are less than the $25,000, so they don't qualify for capital projects. So it's either, hey, stand in line for the building maintenance budget that's in the general fund, that's about $5 million, or we can fund it with a transfer from the capital fund and leave the $5 million intact in the general fund to take care of the day-to-day repairs that need to be done at the schools.
Any questions for the board? Dr. Aguilar?
Mr. Guidry, you're showing $538,000 of active boards for the wings that are under construction.
Yes, sir.
Did we not have active boards in those temporary buildings in some of those locations? And if we do, what are we doing with the old ones?
Ms. Gardner can respond
Hi.
to that.
So some of the active boards in the additional portable buildings are very outdated. I'm going to use Alamo just because I know that school because I came from there. There's not one single active board in the 26 classrooms that are out there right now. So that additional wing, since the budget did not involve any FF&E package for any of the new wings that were built, we were trying to come up with a really good compromise, thinking that technology was the greatest need for the active board. If there is active panels or active boards in those current rooms that are within good shape, we've noticed over the years when we move them, it costs $4 or $5. It costs up to $800 to move a board. If we move it ourselves, then we lose our warranty on it. And 9 times out of 10, when we move them, it just doesn't always move appropriately. And so we're investing money to move them when we're not even guaranteed they're going to work at the same rate that they were working in the portable, if they even have them at that time.
Ms. LeBou?
Okay, 2 questions. The 1.916 that you said you're going to transfer to the general fund, is that the excess that you said would normally go into the, what dollar figure? I know it was over $1 million, but you said instead of putting it into the fund for Prairie and the rebuild of Lafayette High, you're moving it to the general fund. Is that 1.916 figure?
The 1.916 figure is a use of self-funded construction funding, not
Okay.
necessarily it's not being taken out of the reserve for those 3 schools directly. One could say, well, if you didn't make this transfer, then those funds could be transferred into, so that's a possibility, but it's not being taken out of that reserve to fund. It's being taken out of the construction fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my second question is, I see a line item for Catherine Drexel, replace 20 temporary classrooms. Is that completion costs for the construction wing, or is that?
I'm gonna.
Is that just that's just a completion cost for that?
Give me just a minute. I'll look at the funding source real quick. Our wings are funded through various funds. Not all of them were funded through. So to answer your question, yes, that relates to the construction of the wings.
Okay, and my final question is, all of the wings, have we budgeted that 150 number that I see for furniture allocation, is that for, how much of what is in the temporary buildings is going to be able to be usable furniture-wise, technology-wise, all that in the new wings that are being constructed?
Well, with regards to what has been budgeted for the wings, there was no provision. Excuse me. There was no provision for FF&E. So the first step we took was to visit, the sites, and we decided to focus on the technology. With regards to the furniture itself, for that furniture that doesn't lend itself to being moved into the new wing because of condition, we have a line item for a setup of classrooms. We feel that we'll go to that line item to replace those desks that need to be replaced. Those that are still fine and still have life in them will be moved from the portables into the wing.
Okay, so just follow up, that 150,000 is the entirety that y'all have budgeted for that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions from the board? Dr. Aguilar?
Mr. Guidry, you and I spoke today about Ernest Gollette, and I apologize for bringing it to your attention a little bit late in the process. Ernest Gollette is 20 years old, and 80% of the campus is carpeted. And so that carpet is 20 years old, and the principal asked for some money in her capital project request or special projects request. Unfortunately, it was woefully inadequate to address the real cost to replace the carpet. So Mr. Bordelon's come up with a couple of prices to remove the carpet and replace it with floor tile for the entire school as needed would be about $310,000. To replace the carpet would be a little bit more, is that right, Mr. Bordelon? $360,000. So with the board's permission, I would like Mr. Guidry to give some thought to trying to find a way to include Ernest Gollette in a budget adjustment to these funds, if possible.
Any additional questions? Dr. Chasson?
Oh.
I'm prepared to make a motion to ask you to budget either the $310,000 or the $361,000 to Ernest Gollette for floor replacement.
I'll second. Mrs. Santani?
So the reserve is $100,000? Excuse me. That's what the ending, did I see that right? Yeah, $100,000. So what are we gonna take out of here for $310,000?
Dr. Aguilar?
I think I would defer to Mr. Guidry to take a look at the various budgets. I'm not prepared to take something out that might be needed by one of the schools, but give him some authority to come back with a recommendation.
Well, I mean, something's gonna have to come out, is my point. Like, whether it's you or him or me or whoever.
I would say that at this point in time, it would come out of the reserve for future years projects. In this case, that amount is $7.5 million. That would be the line item. So that way it would not impact any of the existing proposed projects if the board were so in favor of doing so.
Ms. Mason?
I mean, this kind of goes back to my question of, like, how do you decide which one's the most important? And you said that you used your professional judgment. So all of a sudden we need flooring. And to Justin's point, I mean, what if we, what's more important? What are we going to take out? I'm just curious, like, how do you decide they need flooring and these people need a roof? So, I'm just questioning the process. How do you, I mean, do we just make a motion and say we want to do this?
Well, if the motion is made and approved, then in essence, the reserve for future year projects, which haven't even been submitted yet, would be reduced. So it's a matter of, are we comfortable with the level that we're reducing it to? I will say this, that, you know, that reserve, at a minimum, we try to put the 2.5 million that's showing in the revenue section, we try to put it that amount and have a year ahead of us. From a target standpoint, a system our size should typically has projects in the $8 to $10 million range. So my preference would be to keep the balance closer to $5 million in each fund. That would give us 1 year ahead of ourselves to address capital requests for a system our size. I don't know if that helps, but and you know, I would also, if the board approves this, we have is it 4 other schools that are similar in age, and looking at the dollar amount, this may be more of possibly a bond project in terms of the last bond sale that we had, if all of them are in fact need the same type of work done.
Sure. Just to be completely fair to Mr. Guidry and Mr. Bordelon, the documents that are sent to the central office by principals, their request, they come to the attention of Mr. Bordelon and his team, and then Mr. Guidry, and then ultimately they sit with the superintendent, in this case Irma Trosclair. The document that came from Ernest Gollett was woefully short on the estimate for the cost to replace the carpet. It came back as $10,000. And it's reasonable to expect that that wouldn't even be funded, because we're looking for larger projects that are, and so when I did a little digging, it turns out, you know, it's 80% of the school that has carpet that's 20 years old. So, I mean, that's why I believe it didn't come up, percolate through the system as it normally would in this case.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Ms. LeBeau?
Just want to make sure that I understand. OCHS, is that Ove Como High School?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I see OCHS, girls gym floor, complete takedown, graphics, and refinish. And then later I see Como High, recoat ceiling of the girls' gym. Okay, so the ceiling, there was something else with the flooring. But the flooding problem, I think they did recoat that gym within the last year or two. But the problem is that the flooding is destroying the gym floor. So I just want to make sure that when we're doing these projects, we've addressed the cause of the need to address this issue. And so I don't know how to do that properly, but I just want to make sure that when we go to put down a new gym floor and spend this money, we're doing it with the thought that we've done this within the last few years, and it's having to be redone because of a maintenance issue and a flooding issue that's causing damage. So just to keep in mind that some of these projects, I think we need to make sure when we're prioritizing the problem and then the solution.
So, Ms. LeBeau, I want to confirm with Mr. Bordelon, but I do believe, Mr. Bordelon, you said that we are taking care of that parking area that's causing the issue? Okay.
And I do see that's a line item on here. I just want to make sure that everything's being done in a way that will actually make that gym shine. Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Dr. Chasson?
Dr. Aguilar's request, is that to re-carpet?
I'm not married to the idea to replace it with carpet. The cheaper version would be the tile, and Mr. Bordelon said that would be but the preferred replacement would be the
cheaper
tile.
option. Okay. Any expert on it? Ripping the carpet up, scraping it or sanding it, can't sand it, but getting it down to its bare level and then staining the concrete underneath? Would that be a much cheaper option? As opposed to putting tile? Just curious, because I can think of a few places that are stained.
There are some issues with staining the concrete. To begin with scraping the carpet off, you don't usually get all the glue off. You get most of it off. Then there's going to be normal cracks and gouges that are in the concrete from when construction took place. So if you stain the concrete, you're going to get you're not going to get an evenly colored floor. So I think the end result is not going to be really what everyone desires. Staining also, the process of staining involves some acid washing and things like that. So some of those processes may not be too suitable for doing that inside of an existing building. So the cost of putting down vinyl floor tile, which is what's common in most of our schools, is probably in the $2.50 to $3 a square foot range just for the tile and the installation.
Okay.
The contractor I checked with today has some experience with removing the carpet like we have in those schools, and it's he's got a special machine that they do it with, because the glue that was used back then was pretty tough stuff. So it takes a special machine to get it up. Then they have to skim coat the floor to make sure it's level when you put the tile down. So it's a pretty involved process to get it back into a good condition where we can put tile.
What's the square footage?
There's the total school is about 93,000 square feet, but there's about roughly 75,000 square feet that has carpet still on it.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you, Kyle. Okay. First question. Scott Middle bleachers. When it's new, do we have to get quotes for those?
If it's over 10,000.
If it's over 10,000, okay. So we got a quote for those bleachers?
We had put similar bleachers, I believe, at Acadiana High. So we based it off of that.
Okay.
If it comes in under 10, it wouldn't require quotes.
Right. But it's over 10, so I'm asking, did we get a quote?
Well, until we would get them when we go to purchase them, yes. This is just for budgeting purposes.
Okay.
We estimated cost based on bleachers that we put at Acadiana High. When we got those, we did get quotes.
Okay, and these are the little metal bleachers that you put on the side, the extras?
I believe so,
Okay.
yeah.
The indoor-outdoor mats for all schools, over 10,000. We're gonna get quotes for those, or we got quotes on them? Because it's over 10,000.
The cost estimates, are typically based on either working knowledge of what mats cost, or we may go to a couple of 3 catalogs and get prices on that, just to estimate the cost. When we actually go to make the purchase, it's going to require the 3 quotes.
It's going to require, okay. Gotcha. $150,000 on doors, exterior doors. How many doors are we talking about for Edgar Martin? I saw that and it kind of jumped off the page to me, so I'm just curious. I know they're tough doors, I know they're strong, but how many doors are we talking? And are the doors made of kryptonite?
I'll defer to Mr. Bordelon on that one.
Yeah. You have any idea, Kyle, how many doors? You take a guess.
Approximately 40 to 50 doors. The doors that are there now are wood doors, and what we'd like to try to replace them with is a hollow metal galvanized insulated door, something that should last a lot longer than the wood doors did.
Okay. Gotcha. The gym recoat. Are there separate prices for the gym recoats per school? 'cause I know some floors are bigger than the others. And if we don't need the gym recoded for, I know it's annual, but like for instance, when we had the small issues at Northside with whoever came and recoded and we're getting the layers, is it per school or is it just a certain amount per high school that we allocate for that?
We get quotes to recoat. We have a schedule that has the square footage of every school's wood floor.
Okay.
And we send that out to various contractors to get quotes. And so they give us a price both by the school and in total.
Okay.
And we award it by the total, but we schedule it out so that they're doing all the gyms over the course of the summer.
Yeah, over the summer. Do you know Northside High School's costs?
Not off the top of my head, but
Okay.
but average is about somewhere about 2,500 to 3,500 per gym.
Per gym.
Average
For the high schools or for
most of the gym floors.
for most of the gym?
I mean,
floors?
like you said, some gym floors are larger than others.
Right.
So I'm just talking averages roughly.
Okay. And that's it. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Billy.
Any board member comments? Any additional comments? Okay, so Mr. Guidry, do we need to vote on the motion on the floor? Yes, do we
Yes,
need to
please.
vote on that? Dr. Aguilar's motion, and then I second it. Okay. Let's go
Is
ahead and
the-
call for the question.
Yeah, I have a question. Is the motion to increase the expenditures to include, I mean, I don't think we've it's a large project. I don't think we've gotten 3 quotes. We've gotten who's done these estimations of 310 versus 360? Okay, so we're voting to increase the expenditures and the approximate value of $310,000. What happens if that's not enough, though?
Stick around until we do it, so
Okay. I'll defer to Mr. Centeni. He has more experience in this.
This is going to be part of my next thing. Was recently everyone has experienced the numbers, the projects, they just keep coming back and they just keep coming back and they just keep coming back. Would it be possible to create a line item for this project? Because I think Dr. Aguilar is right. We don't want kids going to school with moldy carpet. And get some kind of better number before we actually vote on it, because we vote for 310. I mean, you can't in a high price box was like this, right? I mean, it's just a little bit more. I turned mine off. Well, he turned it off now. Anyway, I'll use. I think y'all understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. And that was my question, is like, what are we, I mean, I think just throw a number out there, a line item, I like that instead of the.
Ms. Bordelon, you confident in that number? Was it multiplying a couple of square footages by price?
No. This afternoon I contacted a flooring contractor, explained to him the situation, and it took him a little while to get back to me, but he was familiar with the type of carpet I was talking about from their experience in pulling that kind of carpet up. And of course, being a flooring contractor, they know prices to put flooring back down. So that includes removal, disposal, new flooring tile, new base around the perimeter, because when you pull up the old stuff, the base usually comes up, and even putting 5 coats of wax on the new floor. And then I even added 10% contingency to that. I added 10%.
Okay, from my understanding as presiding president, I'm unable to make a second, so we would need someone to second Dr. Aguilar's motion. Second by Mrs. Centeni.
Okay, could I get clarification on?
Dr. Aguilar, would you please repeat the motion?
So I'd like to budget $361,000 for Ernest Gollett floor replacement.
Second by Mrs. Centani. And we'll go ahead and call for the vote.
Thank you for using the higher number.
Yes. Well, he
I-
10% that added the 10%.
Well, it was 310 for the tile, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate you using the higher number.
I'm sorry.
Go check and see what
I voted.
Dr. Aguilar.
Six, four, one against.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, next item is item 2.7, proposed budget for 2020, 2021, 2016 construction fund. Mr. Guidry?
Okay, so the 2016 construction fund was set up to account for the proceeds from $65 million bond sale back in February of 2018. So as far as the projects go, most of the projects were wing additions. We also had land acquisitions for a new Prairie site, and I believe Karen Crowe Heights as well, and the Scott Middle cafeteria. So if you take a look at the projects that are listed in this proposed budget, these are the amounts. These aren't necessarily the original budgets, but the amounts that we're planning on spending on these projects for the fiscal year 21. But nonetheless, that's the bond sale that it relates to, the $65 million back in February of 18. And I ask if there are any questions. The beginning balance is the remaining bond proceeds that we have not expended yet.
Any questions from any board members? No questions, so we'll move on to the next item. Item 2.8, proposed budget for 2020, 2021, 2018A construction fund.
Okay, so this construction fund was set up to receive the proceeds from a bond sale that generated a little over $27 million back in July 31st of 2018. The main project, not the only project, but the main project in this particular fund was the construction of the new BO Elementary School. There are some funds available remaining after the completion of that school. So we have some work being done at Broadmoor Elementary as well.
Any questions by the board? Ms. LeBeau?
2 questions really quick. Audit fees, is that anticipation of an audit, or is that we expect to audit the project when it's completed? Is that, because I've only seen that built in now to these 2 construction funds, so.
Our external auditors come in, and there's an allocation of their fee to every fund that they actually audit, and this is the allocation to this particular fund.
Okay. Is it just for the bond funds, or is it for all the
Yes.
funds? Okay. And then my second question, the contingency, is that the amount that we anticipate to be under budget, or is that the?
It's excess funds, so that if we need, if something on the project comes in over what we had originally anticipated, we would take it from the contingency fund. If the project comes in on budget, then we'd have room for another project.
Okay, so this is just a reflection of things that have come in under budget. We put the funds in the, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 2.9, proposed budget for 2020, 2021, 2019A construction fund.
This construction fund was set up to receive $25 million of bond proceeds from a bond sale that was closed on April 18th, 2019. Some of the main projects that come out of this particular fund are the 2 ROTC buildings, one at Como High and Acadian High, 2 wing additions, LJ Alamont and Edgar Morton to remove the temporary buildings there, and maybe might even increase the capacity a little at those two schools. We also have a safety assessment that's in process in terms of identifying actions that we will come to the board and recommend that we take as a result of that safety assessment that was done. There are findings. We're going to come back with recommendations on what we feel we can address with the funding that's available. And then we have a contingency of $5.1 million. That contingency's actually going to be reduced some when we complete the bus maintenance facility. It'll probably be closer to probably in the $3 million range. The majority of that contingency goes back to, at one point in time, we had a gym included as a project, and when that gym was removed, the cost estimate for that gym was moved to the contingency line item. So that's why it's so large at this point in time. So one or two things can happen. The board can direct us to utilize that money for projects they may have in mind, or the board can hold off, see what the corrective action plans for the safety initiative identifies, because I can assure you, if we fixed everything, I think the cost estimate was $26 million on that safety assessment. And this was not to say that things are that bad, as much as they had some pretty nice things that any school district would like to have in that. And, we're going to have to look at it and bring it down to something that's, that's realistic and achievable. So I just wanted to make mention of that. That's all the comments I have. If y'all have any questions regarding any of the projects.
Any board comments? Seeing none, we'll move to item 2.10, proposed budget for 2020, 2021 Southside High School Construction Fund.
Okay, so this particular budget shows the remaining funds that are available for reimbursing us for our projects that the board would approve. So typically in a regular bond sale, we sell the bonds, we receive the funds, and we use those funds to cover the cost of the project. With USDA, it works a little differently. It's a cost reimbursement. We spend the money, and then they reimburse us up to the amount of bonds that are sold. So of the bonds, of the bond authorization, the amount that was authorized, we have $683,044 left that we can spend that they will reimburse us for. So with that said, we have it all in contingency, and at that point in time that the board identifies projects for those funds to be used for, we can move it from contingency to the projects that the board directs us to move the funding for.
Any board questions? Seeing none, we'll move to item 2.11, proposed budget for 2020-2021 debt service fund.
Okay, debt service fund, we basically use to accumulate resources to fund the debt payments, our debt service requirements for all of the debt that we have on the books. We have sales tax revenue bonds that have been sold. We have certificates of indebtedness that have been sold. We have various different types of debt instruments that over the years we have sold, just depending on what our needs were. Some of them are short-term, smaller needs, like certificates of insurance are typically in the $10 million to $30 million range now. I think they've gone up a bit. Certificates of indebtedness, yeah. So different types of debt, and this shows our debt service requirements for all of our debt. If we can, I'm going to ask Ms. Richard to go to the future debt service requirement schedule, which is the third page. It basically shows our debt service requirements for all debt. And what I wanted to point out here is when we went through the bond sale process and sold those three different bond sales, our goal was to keep our debt service about where it was before the bond sales occurred. And the way we did that was we knew that we had schools that we'd sold bonds for, that the debt service, we were making our last payments in 2020. And it was about a $6 million drop in our debt service. That was a debt service on those schools. So we bridged the timeline from a year or two ago, from 2018 to 2020, with funds that we had in the debt service fund. The mindset or the strategy being we can cover those debt payments for 2 years, get started on those projects now instead of having to wait 2 years. And when that debt drops off for those schools that we've paid off, we'll have the debt service capacity to continue on into the future. So this sort of shows us what we have in terms of debt drop-off in the upcoming years. We're trying to keep it, if the board chooses to try to keep it in the $16.5 million of debt service a year, then this schedule would show that 2024 is the first year that we have a significant drop in debt service. We do have some debt service requirements dropping off in the interim. I'm just saying that that's where it's pretty significant. It's not to say that we could not, if you notice in 2022, there's a slight drop there from $16,228,415. I'm looking at the total column, the numbers in total column, to $15,315,299. We could have a sale there. And then it goes up a little bit, and then back down in 24. Could have another sale there, and then 25, another sale there. Or bridge it into 25 and sell all the bonds then. The idea being each time you have a bond sale, you're paying for bond closing costs. So although it's a little tempting to, to go ahead and have those smaller bond sales. It costs you, from a legal standpoint, legal fee standpoint, it pretty much costs you the same for, a $10 million or $40 million issuance as an $80 million issuance. The main difference is going to be the commissions that's paid to the folks that are the brokers that are selling the bonds. So just wanted to make mention of that, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. This is a good schedule to refer to when deciding or taking a look at, when we're looking at what we can do in terms of selling bonds. I think this is a good reference point. That's the point I wanted to make for our board members.
Any questions by the board? I seeing none, we'll move on to item 2.12, proposed budget for 2020-2021 combined sales tax fund.
Okay, so this particular fund accounts for our sales tax collection department. We are the central sales tax collector for the parish of Lafayette, we being the school district. We collect for 6 municipalities. We collect for the law enforcement agency, as well as economic development districts within some of those municipalities. I think we're up to, I want to say, 28 revenue buckets. Revenue buckets being individual taxes that we're collecting and having to account for separately. It's our sales tax department. It's pretty robust in terms of the pace that they keep in tracking all of this. You'll notice total budgeted revenues, $228 million. Roughly half of that is for the school district, for the school board. The other half is distributed to the municipalities within Lafayette Parish. And then our share, if you could go down to the distribution section, Ms. Richard, you'll see what actually gets transferred to the school district and which funds it gets transferred to. So, for example, looking at the proposed budget 2021 column, which is the second column, you'll note that of the 65 general fund tax, roughly $49 million goes to the general fund. We have $7.29 million that goes to debt service, sales tax revenue bonds. This is how we fund them, the debt service. Capital improvements at $2.5 million may look familiar to you. When we're going through the revenue streams of the capital improvement funds, we notice 2.5 in the capital improvement fund, 2.5 in the self-funded construction fund. We have an 88 tax as well. That's a half-cent sales tax. That goes into the general fund. And then we have a 2002 tax, which is also a half-cent sales tax. This goes into a separate special revenue fund because these are dedicated funds. Doesn't go into the general fund, just an FYI. And then the other roughly half is what goes to the other governmental entities. So one point I'd like to make is if you take a look at the total expenses of $2.7 million, and you take as compared to the revenues that are being collected, it's about 1.5%. That is not a bad administrative fee on that when you're looking at how much we're collecting. And so not only does it benefit the school district that the costs are at that level, but it also benefits all of the other taxing entities that are in the parish because they're paying a pretty low administrative charge. And I think that was one of the ideas behind centralizing is capturing the efficiencies where you have one body that's doing the collections. I would mention that the budget assumption for the revenues is 0% growth. We're not budgeting any growth over the current year. Current year, we're at right now, we've recognized we're at about 2% better than last year. And for next year, we're budgeting no growth. It's not to say once we get into the general fund that we might not come back with maybe a 0.5%, something minimal. But for the time being, we're going in with zero, just to take a conservative approach to budgeting the revenues. Any questions with regards to the sales tax fund?
Any questions by the board? Ms. LeBeau?
So I know that we are projecting that we're up with the local sales tax, or the projection is up. How big of a swing has historically, what's the largest swing, I guess, in the MFP number that we've ever seen? So what is the range usually for that projection? Is it a big swing, or is it usually just a very small, minor, that any revenue that we have would make up for any losses in MFP, I guess is my question.
So up until the last 2 years, our local collections, of course, feed into the MFP formula.
Right.
And we were actually seeing decrease in our MFP revenues up until 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we projected our revenues, MFP revenues in the budget process, and when we got the numbers in, it was a $6 million swing from our projections to the good. So it's a combination of a few things. One is that calculations based on an average rate for all school districts in the state, both for property taxes and for sales taxes. So if any school district is successful in passing a new sales tax, or successful in increasing a millage rate, that affects the average. That affects our allocation.
Right.
By the same token, if a tax does not get renewed, it affects that allocation. One other big item that's been affecting that calculation is our Jumpstart program. We have a student count that the MFP revenues are based off of. That student count starts with the actual count of the number of students we have, and then they have categories that they weight. So in other words, they know that it costs more to educate a special education child that's in special education, so they weight those students. And there's 6 or 7 different categories. Well, the Jumpstart diploma program got a new weighting, and it made a significant difference in the amount of money that we received, because that program costs more with the resources that are required. So those are sort of the things that have made it difficult the last 2 years to estimate what those revenues are going to be. Previous, we were seeing a decrease because our sales tax, it's always 2 years in arrears. So the sales tax collections they're looking at from 2 years ago. Property tax collections are from 2 years ago. So we could sort of tell, we knew what those collections were, and we could sort of, that hasn't been the case the last 2 years. Now we just wait until we get the budget letter, which is normally about mid-March. Budget letter is from the Department of Education, and it's their first estimate of what our allocation is going to be.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, it
Any
wasn't really a
additional
good
questions?
question.
By seeing none,
Okay, so this fund, the title sort of says it all. This is a fund where we account for basically providing meals to the children, our school children, our students, both breakfast and lunch programs, and it includes administrative, operations, and maintenance as well.
any questions by the board? By seeing none, we'll move on to item 2.14, proposed budget for 2020, 2021, 2002, 1/2 cent sales tax fund.
Okay, so another special revenue fund that we account for separately, and here's where we track the use of those funds. There are five dedications that these funds can be used for. If you look at the expenditure section, you have teacher raises, you have instructional counseling, professional development, lowering class size, tutoring, and extra instruction, and then any excess, once we budget and expend in those dedicated areas, the board can choose to declare an excess distribution, which is that 14th check that's normally distributed in October of each year. So when we conclude the current fiscal year, we will meet with the Blue Ribbon Committee in September. We'll go over the numbers. We'll come to the board with a recommendation of what that excess declaration might be, and the board directs us. Board either approves it or not. So you'll notice in the 2021 column for the proposed budget, we don't have a line item for the excess distribution. We always come back in a budget revision once we go through that process and we have a better idea of what that amount's going to be. We come back and do a budget revision at that point in time. So this is a practice that we use going back well over a decade. We just wait to see what happens. But everything else, you can see by dedication what the expected expenditures are for each of those dedications. Any questions?
Any questions by the board? Mr. Centani?
Mr. Guidry, I know we had briefly discussed late last year about setting up a hybrid one-time distribution permanent increase in salary setup whereby once every so many years there would be a raise, and then the other years there would be the excess distribution. My question is, how much would a $1,000 raise cost for all classroom teachers eligible to receive money from this fund? Do we have, is it $2,150, $2,200, something like that?
That was the $3 million, I believe. Huh? Let's see. You give me just a minute, I might be able to.
And look, I'll tell you what, you don't even have to answer me now. For our next budget meeting, when we discuss this one, would you be prepared to discuss what the mechanics of something like that would look like? And just to make sure we understand what I'm talking about, I'm saying this year we would distribute excess money. Next year we would distribute excess money. Year 3 would come a permanent salary increase. And maybe a small distribution, maybe not. But to get to the point where we are actually increasing teachers' permanent salaries well in advance so that they can plan for this and know it's coming, so we don't reduce ourselves to the email wars and arguments of every October when I don't think entirely rational decisions can be made.
Can you repeat? Is it a phase-in or is it the full amount?
What do you mean a phase-in?
You want $1,000? What it would look like?
Well, it would be every year we would continue the excess distribution, but every so often there would be on a regular basis there would be a permanent salary increase. So what would the mechanics of, I guess the idea being that over the years where we have the excess distribution, we would actually start building towards that permanent salary increase. So instead of trying to take the entire $2.5 million and declaring it recurring,
right,
and then putting a year into reserve, we would maybe take $400,000 this year, and then increase it to $800,000 next year, and then when we hit that magic number,
okay,
we have a permanent salary increase.
Ultimately, it would be about $3 million when we get to the full cost.
Okay, and we still operate on a 12-month reserve, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Have we ever? I would also appreciate being prepared to discuss what it might look like going to a 9-month reserve in this fund,
sure, and
the implications that might have. Thank you.
Any additional questions by the board? Okay, by seeing none, this brings us to the end. I'd like to thank Mr. Guidry, Ms. Richard, Mr. Dugas, and everyone involved in the process. Thank you very much. So if no one has any further business, I will go ahead and adjourn, and thank you very much.
Thank you.